Sick with the slang, sick and I'm destined for fame. Do for the fam, not for the gram. Stunting, you're destined for pain. What's up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world? I would like to welcome you back to another episode of Real Talk with Zuby. On today's episode, we have got on a comedian, an author, and the creator of Titania McGrath. This is Andrew Doyle. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So today, are you appearing as Andrew or as Titania? Which one is it?
Definitely Andrew. Yeah, I can't do that thing of pretending to be her. I'm not an actor. I'm not an improviser. It won't work.
Fair enough.
I know you're good. You're good at identifying as female. I don't think I can pull it off. That's your thing. You know?
It is my thing. It is my thing. As it suits me.
Yeah.
I'm gender fluid, so it's actually really handy. It's fantastic. Like you sort of get the best of both worlds, really.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So Andrew, for people who aren't familiar with you, tell them a little bit about who you are.
Well, I'm. My background is in stand-up comedy. I've been doing stand-up comedy for about 16 years, something of that kind. Mostly shows at the Edinburgh Fringe and in London, and I did a tour last year, sort of national tour of various art centres and that kind of thing. I also write satirical things, so I spent 3 years co-writing the Jonathan Pye character. I have a character which I've developed over the last 2 years called Titania McGrath, who is a kind of a satire of the very kind of prissy, intersectional feminist, but very privileged, but wanting to be oppressed all the time, that kind of character who's on Twitter mostly, but she's written 2 books, the second of which has just come out, which is aimed at children, which is called My First Little Book of Intersectional Activism. And that's, well, ostensibly aimed at kids. But actually, I sent it to a friend of mine recently, and her husband thought it was for the kid, the 4-year-old kid. It looks like it, gave it to her, and she was delighted. And then, of course, they had to carefully take it away from her because, of course, it's full of swear words and really inappropriate things. And, you know, but in a way, it's a good sign because it means that it looks like a kid's book, and it looks like something they would like, you know?
Yeah, man. So I'm curious to, I've watched a lot of different interviews with you. You've been on a lot of big shows, some of the biggest podcasts in the world. And I'd like to learn a little bit more about your sort of backstory. So
Okay.
A lot of times, everyone's always talking about the culture war and wokeness and intersectionality and all that. And we can get into that. But I'm curious to know what it is that sort of led you to this stage. So tell us a little bit more about your background and how this all started. How did you even get into comedy and then eventually enter this whole world of commentary?
Interesting. No one ever asked me this, but it is more interesting than the other stuff in a way. Like, well, I used to write comedy sketches and plays and all that kind of thing at university, and then I did a sketch show in London with 2 other acts, and effectively what happened is this was at a place called the Canal Cafe Theatre in Little Venice, which is a lovely little pub fringe venue. It's where the League of Gentlemen started, and we put on this show, and we were about 5 or 6 minutes short. We didn't have a whole show, and we only realised that in the dress rehearsal. And so I was like, okay, well, what can we do that's quick and easy to fill the space? And I wrote a stand-up set, which I performed. It wasn't very good. It didn't really work, but I enjoyed it a lot when we did it. So I sort of got the bug then. And then I started writing and performing stand-up. And at the time, I was a teacher. And eventually I was earning enough from stand-up comedy and playwriting and writing musicals and that kind of thing to go part-time. So I went part-time for a while, and then I ended up full-time writer and comic. And then I sort of got, the culture war stuff, I got dragged into it just because obviously as satirists or comedians, we're always mocking the things that we think are wrong with society. We're always looking at the vices and follies of society and trying to expose them. And so inevitably I ended up talking about this because it's something I cared about. I could see how authoritarian all of this was and where things were going wrong, and I wanted to mock it. But I was mocking other things as well. I was mocking the government. I was, my stand-up comedy, a lot of it wasn't political at all until Brexit happened. So it just sort of was a natural thing. I will respond to whatever's going on in the world. And also I think because I came from that background, I was going to be an academic many years ago. I got my doctorate at Oxford. I was also a part-time lecturer there. And I was at Wadham College, which is like the most progressive, or what they would call the most progressive of the colleges. And I was sort of steeped in this kind of postmodern, post-structuralist, Foucauldian thing, which at the time had completely taken over the humanities and English literature in particular. So I had all that background in that stuff, so that when this stuff went into the mainstream, I had a kind of, I just knew what it was about, and I knew where it had come from, and I could see the connections between what's going on now and what was being written and proposed then by academics. So I just felt in a good position to talk about it, and that's sort of what happened.
That's really interesting. What was it that you studied at Oxford?
So my doctorate was on early modern poetry specifically, particularly three poets, William Shakespeare, Sir Philip Sidney, and Richard Barnfield, and it was
Are these all evil white men?
evil white men, yeah. But because I was talking about sexuality and things like that, so Richard Barnfield was almost certainly gay. Shakespeare, who the hell knows, but probably gay. And so there was obviously I was engaging with all that stuff about. Foucault wrote a book called The History of Sexuality, and a lot of anything to do with gender or sexuality when it comes to literary criticism at the time took a kind of queer theorist, post-structuralist, feminist view of things, and therefore I read all that stuff, but I didn't accept it. I basically rejected it, and so part of my thesis was a kind of repudiation of that stuff. So that's where I was at really, and also because I was teaching the Shakespeare module to the undergraduates, it meant I had to be familiar with all of the Shakespeare plays because it was in the form of tutorials. So I would have two students at a time, and each group of two would want to do different plays from the canon. So I effectively had to have them all sort of ready and waiting to go. So that was a really useful thing. So it gave me that sort of grounding.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And that's, I suppose, why Titania's a poet as well. I've got the backgrounds in poetry, you know.
Most definitely. And when was it that you started to become alarmed about some of these ideas being taken very seriously outside of academia and starting to steep into the mainstream? What was the sort of year where you were like, there's something going on here?
So I've been trying to work this out. Like, I've always been aware that you have to continually fight for free speech in any society, that it's not a given. And you know that from looking at history. It's something that you just have to sort of continually refresh, you know, and continually remind yourself why it's important. And there's always been those threats, hasn't there? You know, there's always been people pushing for censorship rather than discussion, and that's something that I guess it's just human nature, because you want the things that you find rebarbative and disagreeable just to go away, and I guess we all have to resist those kind of authoritarian instincts. We all have to do that, and as a society, we have to do that. And I could see this was happening more and more. What was interesting to me, because I guess my background was from the left, was that it was coming from the left now. And when I was growing up, whenever you had these sort of campaigns to ban a film or ban a book, they were coming from the right-wing tabloids. They were coming from the Daily Mail or the Express. I mean, I'm thinking particular things like David Cronenberg's Crash or Trainspotting, the Irvin Welsh film, and so, or the Danny Boyle film, whichever way you want to look at it. And so now all of a sudden, though, it was coming from the Guardian, and it was coming from the New Statesman. It was these kind of, and they were using the same kind of censorial language and the same theories. I mean, the same debunked media effects theories that would suggest that popular culture has this kind of trickle-down effect on the behaviour of the public, and you know, we know that's that's generally been debunked. There's all sorts of catalysts to people's behaviour. I'm not saying there isn't, but the straightforward monkey see, monkey do direct effects theory of media has been debunked after 6 decades of research. We know that isn't the case, and yet you have people now saying we need to censor forms of speech. Even jokes can normalise hatred because they will have this effect on the public. We know that's not true. So that started, when was it? I reckon around 2015 it really kicked off. I mean, I know this had been sort of percolating away in the early 2010s, where you had this kind of perversion of political correctness. It wasn't just about politeness anymore, you know? I mean, I'm all for a society where we all agree that we have a social contract. You don't call each other racial slurs or you know, you don't call gay people f***its or whatever, you know, you don't have this kind of derogatory, because we like to be polite and considerate, and I'm all for decorum, and that's what, for me, political correctness was. I think there was overreach every now and then, you know, where people would call the police or try and get someone fired, but it was very rare. But that, through the new version of political correctness, which we might call wokeness or whatever you want to call it, that's the go-to thing, the cancel culture thing. That's the first port of call, you know. So if there's I'll give you an example. When the guy who edited the Waitrose magazine, someone contacted him wanting to write an article about veganism, and he wrote some flippant email back saying, "Oh, well, what will it be? You know, that we'll round up the vegans and force them to eat meat," or it was something really juvenile like that. Sure. It was a joke email, And instead of her saying to him, look, that actually really upsets me and offends me, and can we have a conversation about that? Maybe go for a drink about it. She screenshot the email and put it online and tries to publicly shame him. And in the end, he lost his job. That's cancel culture. That's the go-to thing. And that is what is disturbing about this new form of political correctness, if you want to call it that, which I generally don't, because I like to distinguish between what happened then, the sort of PC of the early 80s, of the late 80s, early 90s, and what is happening now. So I reckon 2015 it really kicks off. Trump's election is largely a response to it, but also exacerbates it. I think it's both, you know? And I think all of the people who were screaming about this stuff in advance of Trump's election suddenly took Trump's election as vindication that the whole world is full of fascists and Nazis, right? So they did this thing where they decided in advance that anyone who votes for Trump is an evil fascist. And then Trump wins, and that gives them evidence that the world is full of evil fascists. They didn't stop to think, well, maybe our original premise was wrong. Maybe the
Yeah.
people who voted for Trump aren't evil fascists. Maybe
Yeah.
they just want to shake things up and change things, you know?
Yeah, there's been a lot of doubling down and tripling down, and
Oh,
I think, between Brexit and Trump in the UK and the USA, we've really
yeah,
seen those parallels. You're seeing. I mean, I think a lot of it stems from arrogance. I think
maybe.
when yeah, I mean, I think when someone is proven wrong and they double down and triple down and quadruple down instead of just doing a little bit of reflection and thinking, maybe I was
Yeah.
wrong. Maybe there was something wrong with my worldview. But instead, they say, see, this is evidence, right? The country is full of racists and fascists and KKK members and what. And you're just like, come on, like have a bit of charity and a bit of humility here, right? If you're
Oh,
if you're off
yeah.
base, like what is more likely that the USA and UK suddenly became full of fascists and racists and 60 million plus of them in America, and how many people voted for Brexit? Was it 20
17.4
7
million.
17 yeah, 17 million, people
Yeah.
who you're walking past every day, who you're interacting with, your kids are going to school with, and what's more likely that your premise was off, and that or that all of these people secretly your whole life they've just been there just stewing, just waiting for this
I
moment, and
know.
I'm
You
like,
just wish like they could apply Occam's razor when it comes to this stuff, but they don't, and that actually has really upset me because I have a great faith in humanity, and I think people are smarter than we give them credit for, and but this has made me rethink a little bit. Why just dismiss all these people that you know and love? I mean, I've lost so many friends over Brexit in particular because I was in favour of Brexit, and the assumption that the fact that we want to withdraw from an economic trading bloc makes you a racist. It doesn't. It really. It honestly. And I'm not denying that there are racists out there, and
nobody is.
but well, this is the other thing. Literally, no one's making that claim.
No.
Literally, no one is making that claim, and that's. So yeah, it has shaken my faith in humanity just a little. That doubling down thing. I mean, whenever I and I know I shouldn't do it, but whenever I get on arguments on Twitter, and when it comes to the point where I've proven them wrong, they'll say, "Oh, you believe this," or I had this one big account having a go at me saying, "You're an evil racist. You've never said anything about the plight of the Windrush generation." So I just linked him to a video of me talking about that very thing on Sky News, and he couldn't say I was wrong.
No.
He just doubled down, started calling me racist, or couldn't do it. And I think what you're saying there about the ego has a lot to do with it, I guess. But actually, there's something really empowering and quite freeing about admitting you're wrong. I always enter into these conversations with the assumption that I could be wrong about anything at any time, because if you don't think that about yourself, you'll never improve and grow as a person. So I think you're right that's part of it. What makes me slightly nervous is that possibly a lot of people have bought into this idea, genuinely
Yeah.
believe that there is this clandestine crypto fascism that's creeping. And that in a sense is more worrying, because the ego thing I can more readily understand. But when people are buying into a delusion, a sort of mass delusion, that's more frightening, because you can't walk them out of that with ease, can you?
Yeah, it's weird. There's a lot of weird psychological phenomena that have been going on over the past few years. Like, another one that I've observed is people just seeming to have extremely short-term memories. Like, very, very short-term memories. Like, people not being able to remember things that happened a couple months ago, let alone things that happened years ago, and put what's happening now in that context. So even with what we're just saying, right? Someone has known you, maybe you have a friend who's known you for over 10 years. right? They
Yeah.
know that they know you're not racist. They know you're obviously not homophobic. They know you're not a fascist. They know you're not this. They know you're not. But then one issue they
Yeah.
disagree with you on,
Right.
and instead of taking everything into context and thinking about it, you know what? I know Andrew. He's a nice guy. He's a good guy. He's not that. Maybe I strongly disagree with him on this thing, but why don't we have a chat and we can see what it is? Because surely it's not that he's xenophobic and racist, whatever. But instead, it's just like, oh no, that's the thing, and it's just
Yeah.
like I said, it's very uncharitable, and
Yeah.
just in general, yeah, people seem to just forget that. I don't know, just stuff that happened. Again, even if you want to talk about the U.S., right? People are talking about racism, etc., and it's like, is everyone forgetting that you had a black president for 8 years,
Yeah, I
right?
think you're right.
So,
There's a weird cult of amnesia, and
yeah.
it goes for every. I see it all the time. Things like after Brexit, there were these people saying, "Well, no one ever said that this would be related to leaving the customs union." And then you go online and you look at the debate about the biggest debate at Wembley Arena, I think it was, which was the biggest televised debate about Brexit. Within the first 5 minutes, they're talking about the impact of leaving the single market and the customs union. It's like we've not only have we lost our memory, but we've got the internet. It's incredible. I know they love that word gaslighting,
Yeah.
but that's what they're doing all the time. Is they're just stating what we know not to be the case. I mean, it goes back to CNN last week having that Chiron saying largely peaceful protests while there's explosions and burning cars in the background. It's like it's not just an amnesia.
Yeah.
It's a deliberate attempt to just falsify reality, just state the opposite of what is the case. It's really weird, and I think you can broaden it to. I like this amnesia idea that you're raising because if you think about it, it relates to the whole way that the Black Lives Matter movement and that kind of thing has conducted itself. Insofar as there's a kind of amnesia about the progress that has been made over the past 50 or 60 years. It's like things have never been worse. We're still living under Jim Crow. Like that there are still people who support slavery. There's no one. You wouldn't be able to find a single person, right? But then when they tore down Edward Colston's statue, James O'Brien at LBC tweets out, "However you feel about that statue is how you feel about slavery." Are you kidding? No, maybe some people just don't like mob rule, and maybe some people are just for liberal democracy, and they don't. It's so simplistic and infantile, and that's the other thing is as to why I think the woke side will lose, because the liberal approach to, and by liberal I mean traditionally liberal approach to these these ideas, to challenging racism, sexism, homophobia, it works. We know it works because we've had 60 years of progress, incredible progress, by the way, like just unbelievable progress. So we've got that track record. But the woke stuff, even in the space of the last 4 or 5 months, has caused division, more racism, more antagonism. We know it doesn't work already. So, but you'd have to have an awareness of history and like you say, a memory about history in order to reach this conclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing I think why people like myself and yourself and lots of others are so opposed to this woke ideology and the intersectionality and the putting race and gender and sexuality back at the top of the things that are important about a person is because it's literally the same thing that people have been fighting for all those decades to overcome. So when I'm seeing universities in the USA having racially segregated spaces,
Yeah.
when I'm seeing people being denied jobs because of their skin color or being refused promotion or people being chastised and attacked based on their gender or their race or whatever, I'm just like, you're and all under the banner of so-called progressivism. I'm just like,
Yeah.
you guys are calling me regressive. I'm like, this is the regression. You're going back. You're undoing all of the stuff. I mean, the other day on Twitter, um, a couple months ago, so not long ago, someone said something to me. They were upset about all this stuff, and they said, like Martin Luther King would be rolling in his grave. And I said, if Martin Luther King were alive today, they'd be calling him a coon and an Uncle Tom. And then lo and behold, a week later,
Yeah.
we're having a discussion and someone brought up MLK and someone said, oh, well, MLK was a sellout. And I'm like, oh my gosh, here we are. Like people are actually like,
Hey, anything you can anticipate is going to happen. Like I know I make these jokes. I did a joke as Titania. I tweeted out an image of Goebbels and the Nazis burning books in 1933, and I said this is so empowering. This is social justice activists decolonizing the curriculum at this university in the 1930s. But and now, of course, yesterday there was a viral video of someone burning J.K. Rowling's books. Anything you can, even Jedward said they were going to start burning her books.
Yeah.
Which I love, as though if you buy her book and burn it, she doesn't get the money. But I mean, we anything you can think of, and now I'm starting to think, how far will it go? Are they literally going to start mimicking Mein Kampf? How far can it go? There was a thing the other day, a podcast about how interracial marriage has ennobled white supremacy.
I saw that.
So,
I didn't listen to the podcast, but I saw the headline.
okay, well, this fear of miscegenation is one of the oldest racist myths. It's one of the oldest white supremacists. So that's someone literally advocating white supremacy in order to attack white supremacy. So whatever you think about, I mean, the worst thing you can imagine, we're probably only a year away. Like, I don't, they I find it so depressing.
Yeah, it is. It's disturbing. And it's weird because it's one of those things that like once you become conscious of it, you see it, you can't like put the genie back in the bottle. Like sometimes I wish that I were one of those people who were just sort of like very clueless about what's going on in culture and politics and whatever. And I
Yeah,
didn't even know what the word woke meant. I didn't even know what an SJW was. I'd never heard of intersectionality. Like I sort of, in a way, I sort of missed that.
yeah. Mm.
But it's like once you see it and you see where it's going and you see what people are saying and the rhetoric and what's going on. I mean, the other day in the US, you had that situation where someone just walked up to a police car and shot into it and they
I
shot,
saw it. That's
and
horrible.
they shot two police officers. And then you look at the comments
Mm.
and, you would think that, okay, this is something that everybody will agree on condemning. And then
Yeah.
you look in the comments and 40% of them are in favor or excusing it. And you're just
And not only
like,
that, people, protesters outside the hospital chanting
I
that they
saw
hope that he
that.
died.
It's
I
true
mean,
evil.
and I think I like to think that maybe in 10 years' time or so, these same people will look back and think, what happened? How did I lose my mind? Because I do consider it a kind of mass delusion. I think in my family from Northern Ireland, they lived through the Troubles, and people there, you had normal people who, under any circumstances, wouldn't go out and plant bombs and shoot people, and now, with retrospect, a lot of them are saying to themselves, "I don't know what happened there." I think this kind of mass delusion takes over, and people do lose their minds. I do believe in redemption, though, ultimately,
Yes.
and I like to think that hopefully, even the people who have murdered in the name of this cause will be able to one day realize what they have done, and hopefully, I don't want to sound all Christian, but repent. Just
Yeah.
repent.
No,
Find a way.
I'm with you on that one. I mean, I think that I am a Christian, and I think that there are in multiple ways. I think that there are a lot of religious themes and overtones in a lot of this stuff, right? I
Well,
think yeah. Sorry, go
this
ahead.
No, it's just that this is something I've been thinking about a lot because in the book I'm writing now, where because for a long time I've been comparing the wokeness to a religion, and that has become a kind of generalized thing now, that because it's an easy shortcut, it makes complete sense as an analogy, but it's not really, because it doesn't have any of the good aspects of religion. What it is the best analogy is a fundamentalist religion.
Yes.
That's what it is, really. One that has absolutely brooks no dissent whatsoever, and literally wants to destroy heretics. Now, to the extent of wanting to kill heretics. I mean, really, is there a difference between going up to innocent people in a car and shooting them because of the uniform they're wearing and burning a heretic at the stake? I mean, we're at that point now. So those are the parallels that we need to emphasize, I think. And actually, the good things about Christianity, the emphasis on forgiveness and redemption, and basic humanity, and turning the other cheek, and those are the things that this movement does not have
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
that's worrying.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I mean, I've been saying this for years, and it's quite interesting to see a lot of people who, especially, perhaps are more opposed to religion, who, I remember a few years ago were saying that, no, you can't compare these things, et cetera. And I'm like, no, like this is happening. And also like you said, the very positive aspects of certainly, Christianity, which, whether or not someone, believes in God or is a Christian, et cetera, I don't think you can deny that in a country like the UK and lots of Western countries, a lot of our general belief systems and even laws and ideas and whatever, a lot of that is rooted in Christian ideals. And
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
for example, and one I think the most radical notion in Christianity is love your enemy, right?
Yeah,
That's the most
absolutely.
radical one, because I don't think that's something that, some people will argue that, all morality can be derived from just evolution or just general rationality, et cetera. And loving your enemy is not something that, I don't think it's a conclusion you'd come to purely based on evolution or rationale or whatever, because it doesn't, on a surface level, it doesn't really make sense, right? If somebody is in opposition to you and they really don't like you, whatever, to turn the other cheek, to love your enemy, etc. Like, that's a really difficult, that's a very
Yeah,
difficult commandment, because the natural thing is to want to fire back, to want to retaliate, seek vengeance, etc., which is what people are doing, and they're doing it
yeah,
on a collective level, which is extremely dangerous, right? It's not
yeah.
even, okay, this individual harmed me, so I want to hurt this individual or I want to get back at them. It's this whole group of people, whether it's men, whether it's white people, whether it's white men, whether it's straight people, whether it's the police, whatever, this
Mm.
whole group, just by your immutable characteristics, you are now wrapped up into this, and you're somehow complicit. It doesn't matter if you, Andrew, have never done anything. It doesn't matter, right? You are white and you are male. So therefore, you're just complicit in this thing. And it's like, that is such a, that's the kind of thinking that's led to the biggest atrocities in human
Oh,
history and around
it's
the
chilling.
globe. It's horrible.
It's absolutely chilling. People don't, and like I said, people don't know their history. One of the positives that I'm taking from what's going on at the moment in the past 4 months or so is that, well, no, this sounds arrogant. I don't mean this to be the case, but in a sense, what I've been proven right in terms of what I've been saying, and fewer and fewer people are coming up to me and saying, "Oh, you're just," because I used to get this all the time. You're fighting basically a few students on campus, a few overzealous people in the dark recesses of the internet, just these culture warriors. I'm like, well, this will go mainstream, and look at it now. It's everything. It's in politics, it's in education, it's in the arts, it's in the police, it's in the law. It's dominating everything now, and fewer and fewer people are raising that with me.
Yeah.
Fewer people are challenging me and saying, because they can't anymore, because the evidence of what I've been saying is everywhere now.
Exactly.
And so so the positive of this is that maybe we can now push back against it in a serious way, because people are sick of it.
Yeah.
Like, so many people are just sick of it, and they're sick of capitulating.
Yeah.
And so more and more we're getting that.
Awesome. Yeah. I think a lot of people don't recognize it until it
Mm.
hits close to home. I think that's the reality. Once
Sure. I
someone,
mean,
once it hits close to home, then people are suddenly like, oh, okay.
or when
I
it's your
see what you're.
kids, I reckon children will be the kid, because now with critical race theory coming into schools, and you see all these tweets from parents saying, "What's just happened? My child's been told that they're racist because they're white. What's going on?" And they're pushing back, and they're openly tweeting about it, and they're going to the head teachers and saying this isn't right. And so actually, that might be the breakthrough: is that when it comes to people's kids, don't mess around, because
Yeah.
that's when they'll stand up.
Yeah.
It's the
Definitely.
most basic instinct of humankind, and now that they're going for kids in terms of the books as well. I mean, like Anti-Racist Baby, that book by Ibram X Kendi,
Honestly.
and I mean that book. I mean, you look at that book. I mean, it's only 7 pages long. But because it's a board book. It's what made from a big thick board for little babies who won't understand. They won't know what this is about. And he asked people to send in pictures of their kids with the books, and there were like babies with Black Lives Matter T-shirts on, holding this book, and you think, come on, they didn't pick that out themselves. They don't know what's going on. I mean, how is it? It's funny to me. I mean, it's sinister, but it's also funny. That's why I wanted to write this children's book as Titania, because it's funny to me, the idea that you could make such a flagrant attempt at indoctrination, and you don't have the self-awareness that people can see right through it. It's insane. I laugh, and I also get upset.
I'm with you, but I think that laughter and humor is so powerful. That's I think that's why what you do has resonated so much. I think it's why my deadlift tweet last year resonated so much, because instead of just sort of getting angry and trying to use, I often say you can't use logic and reason to get
Yeah,
someone out of a position that they reached just through emotion and irrationality, right?
right.
So in a way, I don't even think that arguing with it makes that much sense for people who are
No.
fully indoctrinated. But taking those ideas
Mm.
and satirizing them, or just going along with them to an extreme, whether that's me constantly identifying as a white woman, or that's you running a Twitter account as a white woman.
Yeah. What are
and
you
just
today? Are you a white woman today? Is that your thing
um
now?
it's not even on a daily basis for me. It's more just in the moment.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
so if I want to get a discount at the store, sometimes I identify as white and I get the 20% white privilege discount.
Right, right.
But if I want to claim the oppression points, then I'm, not just black, but I'm also indigenous and I have a disability that nobody can see. So,
Amazing. You like
whatever.
Jessica Krug, right? She can. That professor. Oh, what I love about that story, that professor who pretended to be black for all those years, and as a result, her career just blossomed. It did though. Like she got the top jobs, and you think. But I thought the narrative was that if you're black in America, you'll get absolutely nowhere. Why are people? That doesn't really make sense to me. Anyway, that was insane.
You're applying logic. That's the
But
thing.
that's she's like Rachel Dolezal times 100 though, because at least with Rachel Dolezal, she wrote a book about I mean, her parents are both what they're the whitest people in the world, basically. And but she, I think, has a genuine psychological disorder. She wrote in this book about how when she was a children, she used to draw pictures of herself and color them in with brown crayons rather than peach crayons, and that because of course that's what all black people do. That's how you know you're black is. But she believes it,
Yeah.
and hearing her being interviewed, you think okay. And then there were discussions on even major news networks in America where people were saying, well, maybe it's possible to be black to be black if you choose to be black, right? We're in the realm of craziness. I think with Jessica Krug though, it was just opportunistic. I
Yeah.
think.
Well, we see that now because now when they say woman or they say black or they say person of color, etc., it'll have a little asterisk next to it, and you scan down the page, and it will say by black or by woman we mean people who identify as
Yeah.
such. That's pretty
Exactly.
standard now.
I've seen that in NUS stuff, student stuff.
Yeah.
That came in a few years ago. People who identify as black, and no one will challenge you, of course. But then this makes it complicated because when in Edinburgh the students had this was last year they had a resisting whiteness sort of like conference, and they said that only people of color were allowed to participate in the Q&A. That was part of it. So they're getting it all confused because whiteness for them is like this weird nebulous thing. Okay, so but then if you look white but you identify as black, what if you're mixed race? Can you ask half a question, or can you ask a question in a hushed tone? How do they determine? So either whiteness is a thing that anyone can enact, including people of color, or it is something you identify with skin color. They don't really know what it is. That's
Well,
what I
well,
like.
well, the same people will say that I'm not black and that I embody whiteness and white supremacy. So, you
Do you
know,
get that a lot then?
I get it a fair bit. I get it a fair bit. So yeah, I mean, look, I'll be honest. Like I said, I think the solution is for everybody to go full Titania. I think the solution is for
Yeah,
every.
maybe.
I'm starting to think the solution is for everyone to just say, okay, these are the rules. I think men should start going into women's changing rooms. I think that I think everyone. I think if there's an event for black people or people of color, I think loads of white people should come to it and identify as black and identify with the struggle. I think that black people should be identifying as white and claiming white privilege. I think everyone, if we're going to do it, I say like let's just go full on lunatic, and I think within a week we'll be done. I think within a
Um,
week people will
I,
be like, you know what, this is maybe we should rethink
I,
some.
I think that would work if everyone did it, but I don't think you're going to get everyone to do it.
I think everyone should. I think the next time a white person is accused of white guilt or white fragility, I think they should say that they are indigenous and that they're a person of color, and that you should not, and you've misgendered them. I think people should. I think people should
By the
go
way,
fully with it.
why has no one problematized Robin DiAngelo, by the way?
Oh,
Like,
I
so,
have.
oh, have you? Good. Because, but why haven't the woke attacked her? She's a white woman writing about race. I thought she had to stay in her lane.
And
You know,
making
what-
what
like,
20 grand for speech for
oh.
going in and lecturing people.
So when people say to me, you're not allowed to talk about race because you're white. I'm like, well, why does no one ever say that about Robin DiAngelo? Is it because she's saying the things that you agree with? Maybe. This is the thing. I mean, that book, it's one of the worst books I've ever read.
Yeah, I'm convinced she's the
Really,
most racist woman in America.
by her own admission, she's racist. That's what's
Yeah,
funny.
and she's projecting it. She thinks that everyone else is like her, which they're not. So,
The bit in the
um,
book that gets me is when she talks about being invited to a party, and there's two parties going on. It's a street party, and she says on the one side there were mostly black people at this gathering, and this other gathering mostly white people. And she had this fit of anxiety, or what if I've been invited to the black one, you know? And I think, wow, you are a racist, right? And and she then thinks, well, this is the way white people respond. This is what, and I'm like, I wouldn't have thought that.
exactly.
Don't talk for me. Like you're the crazy racist woman.
Yeah, she's projected her own insecurities and internal racism onto the entire white population,
Well, I
and
suppose it makes it easy to
people
deal
have
with.
accepted it. That's the thing, people have
That's
accepted it.
weird as well. Exactly. Like, but I get it. Like, I suppose if you're innately racist because of your whiteness, then it kind of absolves you of responsibility for your terrible thoughts. It absolves her of the responsibility of reflecting on why she has such a negative view of black people.
Mm.
Why is it when she's at that conference and she describes, I can't remember, it's late in the book where she describes how one of her colleagues left or someone walked out and she turned to a colleague, a black woman, and she said, "Oh, maybe they left because of your hair." And I think, well, and then she
Wow.
says, my conclusion was that I have to reflect on my racism. And I'm thinking, yes, you do, because that statement wouldn't have occurred to me in a million years. And I don't know many white people. In fact, I don't know any white people who would have thought that, or even not only that, but had the gumption to say it out
Yeah.
loud. I mean, like, so why, why are we platforming this racist? Why?
None of it makes sense. This is coming from the same people who will say that, we need more black voices, we need more melanated
Yeah,
voices, etc. And then as soon as I say something, they'll be telling me to sit down and shut up, and that I should be canceled, and perhaps I'm not even really black. Despite having like the most African sounding name in the entire world, if you hear the full version of it. But
yeah, but you've gone
yeah,
to the opposite.
look,
That's what I mean.
I think like people, I do think that I think people need to stop taking it so seriously in a way. Like
Mm,
I think it should be taken seriously as in it needs to be dealt with, but people with these ridiculous ideas and ridiculous concepts and who are just spouting nonsense. When you see these tweets and it does look like something that Titania wrote, and it's just some blurb of complete nonsense. And instead
yeah,
of people going like, "Wow, this is amazing. We should pay attention to this person and how one like." It should all. I think it should be mocked. I think it should be
yeah, yeah,
satirized. It should just be like this is just insanity. When people
yeah.
are talking about how owning a dog is a sign of white supremacy because it makes you feel like you have a slave or something. I'm like, what planet are you? What are
But
you
that
even talking about? Or that thing that came out in the museum in U.S. where they were talking about symbols of whiteness, and it included things like logic,
man,
rationality, timekeeping.
that's one of the
Basically,
most racist things I've ever seen.
I was so offended. I was like, wait.
But or yeah, exactly. Just list loads of positive characteristics and say that imply that black people have no right to. Oh, come on. I think you're right. Yeah, mockery. And the thing is, they know it. They know that mockery can damage them, right? And that's why they
Yeah.
go after comedy. That's why that you see it all the time. This problematizing jokes, problematizing comedians. Saying that all of this stuff normalizes hate and all the rest of it. They know because it makes them figures of fun, and every tyrant in history has killed the comics, has killed the clowns. That's what it is. So
So
yeah, I think you're right.
yeah. So what was it that made you decide to create the Titania McGrath account, and why has it been suspended so many times?
So I think that's partly what I'm saying about the tyrants and their fear of being mocked, and that's why they suspend it because obviously Twitter is super woke, and it's difficult for them to suspend it because obviously their algorithms won't pick up on this. Her hatred for white men and straight people and all the rest of it, they're fine with that, and because she's literally saying that, it's difficult for them to ban it because to ban it means they have to understand the irony. Well, of course they do, and so therefore they use any excuse. Whenever she gets suspended, I get an email saying, "This is the tweet you've been suspended for." And you look and you think there's nothing. That sometimes it's the most innocuous of her tweets, by her standards, and you think they're just using any old excuse. So I don't know. The reason I set it up was precisely this reason. I mean, Twitter is the forum where the social justice activists operate. It is their battlefield. And so my view was to satirize that. It should be through Twitter. It should be on their own turf. And for a long time, because so many people were taking it absolutely seriously, that it had that kind of effect. And now it's a different thing because most people know. Although even today, people still think it's real because it's too close to what they actually say. And even sometimes when people say to me, "Oh, well, this one you've said, no one would ever say this," and then 3 months later they do, and you think, okay. You see the other day, this American bookstore had a collection of its favorite books, it's like a presentation of all its favorite books about diversity and inclusion, and Ibram X. Kendi was there, and Robin DiAngelo and the rest of it, and then Titania McGrath's first book was there proudly on the stand. And
Amazing.
when people, it sort of went a bit viral and people started going at them, and Tim Pool did a podcast about it, and then they took it off their stand, obviously. But not only that, they took it off their website, so you can't even buy the book there anymore. When they realised it was actually an enemy interloper, a Trojan horse, in their world, they got rid of it. So
The fact they couldn't tell the difference is incredible if you think about it.
I mean, look, the first chapter of that book, her book Woke, is about her life, and the first chapter is called My Struggle. And the fact that they couldn't even see what that was and what I'm saying there, is ludicrous. You just have to flick through, but then maybe they don't see.
No.
You know, maybe they don't.
No, well, it's the thing is, it's so ludicrous that it's borderline impossible to
Yeah.
tell the difference between satire and reality. I have seen some of these accounts on Twitter, especially a lot of them are verified accounts, and they're just saying I'm just reading it like, what? Wait, does this person really? Do they really believe this, or it's just this word salad of just words they've just thrown together from
Yeah.
various sociologists over the past 50 years, and it's just this hodgepodge that doesn't mean anything, and you're just like, and then you look at the comments and people are like, yes, this is amazing, this is brave, this is stunning, I'm with you, sister, etc., and you're just like, what?
But that's the whole thing about that sociology. I mean, that whole area of academia, which uses basically buzzwords instead of thinking. So it's a substitute for thought. You can just throw the right words out, and they've been doing this for years. When I was an undergraduate, it was about using the right words, using the words like discursive and hegemony or whatever, and then it would get my supervisor for my doctorate at Oxford said to me. That most of these books, these academic books about queer theory or gender studies, they get published because they're just strings of this sort of word salad jargon, just completely obscurantist nonsense, and the publishers don't understand it, and the publishers don't want to say, I don't know what any of this means, because they'll look stupid. I mean, it's a trick, so don't try. I've seen those. I mean, most of the academics on Twitter, the blue check ones especially, they're activists masquerading as academics, and once you learn their language and do the reading, you realize they've got nothing. They're just talking to each other and they're just repeating each other's phrases, and they try and intimidate people with the jargon. That's what they're doing. They're basically saying, I'm an expert, you're not. You don't understand these concepts. So when I talk about whiteness, I'm not talking about what you think of as whiteness. When I talk about anti-racism, I don't mean opposed to racism. I've invented a whole new thing of anti-racism, which you won't understand. So just it's an intimidatory tactic, and I think that's why I like having the arguments with academics, because they can't do it to me. I know what these words mean. I know what they mean by these words, and I've done the same reading, and it bothers them. That's why they hate James Lindsay, because he's read more of this woke nonsense than they have. So they can't catch him out like that and try and trick him with. I mean, this is no different than, I've made this analogy before, but there was a time when the Catholic Church burnt William Tyndale at the stake because they didn't want the Bible in the vernacular, because they didn't want the people making up their own minds and reading scripture for themselves. They wanted to be able to say, no, we are the ones who have the esoteric knowledge, and we will tell you what to think. And that often meant misinterpretations of the Bible. So that's what it is.
Yeah, most definitely. Where do you think things are going to be in 2025? In 5 years from now, how do you think the sort of social, cultural, political climate is going to be? Do you think we'll be in a better place, or do you think that this is potentially gonna, because this has happened quickly. Like you said, you started noticing this in 2015. So from 2015 to here, it's happened quickly. So in another 5 years, where do you think things will be? So
best case scenario is that people are going to wake up to this stuff. People are going to, as you say, start mocking it, start standing up. Not capitulating is the key. So, when your boss calls you in for an anti-racist diversity workshop, studies are now showing that these actually do make more racists.
Lo and behold.
Yeah, who could have thought it, Yeah. And then, so more and more people are going to start saying, no, I'm not doing it. Sorry, I'm not, I'm not going to have you tell me that I'm a racist when I'm not. More than that, I'm not going to have unconscious bias sessions. Doesn't matter about what I think. You have no right in a liberal society to be probing around in my head, right? You just, so stuff like this, more and more people. And maybe in 5 years, it'll just have gone away. And the best case scenario is people will say to me, and people like me and people like you, "Oh, you were making a fuss about nothing. What a waste of time that was." And all your books and all your articles and all the rest of it were just a waste of time. That's best case scenario that I'm out of a job in that respect, you know. And I'm fine with that. I'd rather the world change in that direction, and all of it. And I can go on to writing about other stuff that I'm really excited about. That, you know, I'm writing about this stuff now because I feel I have to.
Yeah.
But I'd love nothing more than to be able to go back to writing about literature and other political issues which are really important. Economic inequality. I mean, they don't care about that, but I do. You know, I think this sort of stuff, they really don't, by the way. They have that, the privilege for them is all about identity.
Yes.
You know, whereas of course the key point of privilege is how much money you have and how you know, obviously it's a no-brainer. So I think maybe that, or it'll go the other way. And what makes me very nervous is the American situation, because Biden and the Democrats have completely bought into identity politics in this big way. Yes. Kamala Harris has obviously is overt about that, and even Biden himself has called himself the transitional president. I think they're voting for Kamala Harris.
I mean, the fact that she's even the vice president, like the vice presidential nominee, based on her immutable characteristics.
Well, she tanked in the presidentials.
Yeah,
she isn't she wasn't popular.
No. I mean, Biden said my vice president is going to be a woman. Like, he said that months ago, and he said, and most likely, and then people said, well, it must be a woman of color. So she was literally picked based on her immutable characteristics, not because they actually think she's the best person for the job.
I think he was cornered by Charlemagne the God. I think it was, who cornered him into it should be a black woman. You know, because I think he'd said it'll be a woman, and then it was, well, now it'll be a black woman. And okay, well, why not just choose the best candidate? And if it's a black woman, great. Like, no one will care. They'll care about. Well, also, you know, she kind of called him a rapist and a racist. So yeah, she had that whole conversation about the segregation of schools and so yeah, that's a pretty big. So I think it's quite clear he didn't want to pick her. Like, I think it's a, you know, if someone called me a racist rapist, I probably wouldn't give them a cushy job. You know, so I don't think he wanted to, but he feels he has. But what this does mean is effectively now, you know, I'm not a supporter of Trump because I believe in statesmanship, and I don't, you know, I think he's very funny, but I don't want the president to be funny. You know, I want, you know, that's the thing. So
I do.
Okay.
I think
I think
it undermines the entire thing to some degree, which I actually think is good.
Well, the thing that I like is the extent that he annoys all the right people, but he also does annoy the wrong people. And I think I don't think he's very good at diplomacy, and I think
Peace in the Middle East. Peace in the Middle East.
I was about to say Peace Israel. North Korea. Yeah. Okay. But even so, I still don't think that the leader of the free world should be calling another leader fat on Twitter. Right. So that's just my. I don't think that's diplomatic, personally, particularly when they've got a nuclear arsenal. But that said, what if a buffoon like Trump is the defense against the complete destruction of Western civilization? Right. So I don't know. Like, I honestly, I couldn't vote for him. But I couldn't vote Democrat either. Luckily, I'm absolved of that responsibility because I'm over here, you know. But either way, I think it will exacerbate the tensions, because if you buy into the woke stuff to the extent that the Democrats have, things are going to get worse and worse and worse and more illiberal. But if Trump gets in again, they'll double down. They'll take that as further proof that they're in the fascist nation, and things will escalate anyway. That's what makes me nervous. I think, and I can't see a way out of it. So, to go back to your question, where will we be in 5 years? I think whatever the outcome of the election, it's going to be disastrous.
Oh,
so I'm not. You know, I like to be optimistic, but I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Man, I mean, I'm very much an optimist by nature. Very much an optimist by nature, but I'm an optimistic realist.
Okay.
And I really think it depends on the so-called silent majority. I think it depends on people collectively just being like, you know what, no. Like you said, you know, people want to take you in for unconscious bias training. People want to force you to, before a meeting begins, you know, do a prayer where you confess to your whiteness and your guilt and your inherent racism and whatever before the meeting begins. Like, when people are just like, you know what, no. like you said, when their school teachers are wanting to teach their 6-year-olds, teach the white kids that they're privileged, teach the black kids that they're oppressed, and that there's all these dynamics in society that are going to benefit them or set them back, etc. I think when people just collectively, not just the culture warriors, not just the
Yeah.
political pundits, not just the people, but just the normal people. Because look, if you talk to people in real life, very few people, these ideas are not popular. They're not popular. The idea
No.
that you should judge someone based on their skin color, or that, white people are evil, or white men are the devil, or this or that, or, men in general are having weekly patriarchy meetings, putting the boot down on women. White people are putting the boot down. These ideas they're really not popular. Like
No.
even amongst people who are more liberal, more left leaning, they're not popular ideas, but people feel cowed, really. People are
We got
afraid.
over it, didn't we? But through the
Yeah,
whole civil rights struggle, we had these debates. We
exactly.
moved on this. The
Exactly.
problem you're going to face, though, is that a lot of people, particularly in the UK, are going to say to you, yeah, but that sort of stuff, the prayer of contrition about your whiteness before meat, that isn't happening. What's that? Because that is happening in America and isn't happening yet here. But the problem you've got for these people is that now that, for instance, White Fragility by D'Angelo is so popular over here, now that, well, not popular, but I've got teachers have contacted me saying it's on their reading list now,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's only a matter of time. So at the moment, there are teachers out there and people out there who aren't familiar with this. They haven't been confronted with it yet, and then it's going to start creeping in. It's inevitable because it's certainly taken over the universities in the UK. So and now we know that it's seeping into schools. So how long before? So that's the pushback you'll get as well. This is in your head. This is you're importing a problem that's in America and that isn't here, but it will be here very, very soon.
Yeah, I think eventually I just think eventually people have to wake up. And, people might have, like I said, it may have to just hit very close to home. I know a lot of people who totally refuse to accept that there are sort of any issues on the left side of the political spectrum. Conservative types, have been talking about this for forever. And
Yeah.
people have been saying that it's a slippery slope fallacy, or that, they're being unnecessarily concerned about certain things, and et cetera. And, but there can be cases where perhaps that's been true.
Sure.
But in a lot of cases, people have been proven right. Things people were saying 10 years ago or 5 years ago are now coming to light. I remember in 2016 having a discussion with people, because I started to see the whole, biological men competing against biological women in sports by identifying as women or saying they're
Hmm.
trans or what. I'd seen that. I saw that happening years ago. And I remember having conversations with friends and saying, you know what, like, if you can just identify as a man or identify as a woman, like, this is going to open a whole Pandora's box of
But
craziness.
they would have said to you that
Yeah,
you're fighting an imaginary enemy.
exactly. They did.
Then
They did.
Stonewall, even Stonewall, so the major LGBT charity in this country, has now said there's no issue with biological men playing women's rugby.
Yeah.
So, I mean that's just physically dangerous. So you were right, basically.
Yeah, I was right.
That's
I mean, look, I'm the British women's deadlift record holder. Like,
you are
I am.
definitely.
You're speaking to her. So anyone who was saying that that I was being alarmist or that I was making something up, it's like,
Yeah.
well, lo and behold, no, I'm not. And you really don't need to be a genius to work out the potential danger and implications
Right.
of this,
And,
especially when they're talking about sports, they're talking
yeah.
about prisons.
And what's fascinating about this now is the alliances that are happening. So, I mean, people who are traditional on the left and the right finding each other and saying, actually, no, but we all agree that this is nonsense. Feminists, of course, most notably, are feminists who have would really be in opposition to a lot of the points that I've made in the past, but now are on side because of the trans issue and they see the threat. So, and that's been really interesting. I mean, now the LGBTQIA plus acronym, or whatever you want to call it, has no function anymore because, of course, the various factions within that are at loggerheads. It doesn't work. You can't have, you can't, when Stonewall is redefining homosexuality as to mean same gender attraction rather than same sex attraction.
Oh, wow.
That's a homophobic statement coming from the leading gay rights charity, right? So you're going to have a problem. Transgenderism isn't a sexuality, right? So it doesn't make sense to be part of the initialism there. So you have these conflicts, and you can deny it all you like, but they're there, and this sort of finger in the ear. I'm not going to listen about this stuff at all. It's not getting us in. We need to have a discussion about a sensible adult discussion about the conflict of rights that exist within that, between women and who want their own spaces, and between trans people. And I do believe that everyone should have equal rights. But when there's a conflict of rights, you need to have a discussion, not
Absolutely.
say we don't have the debate because you're shutting down my right to exist. This incredible inflammatory rhetoric. You're erasing my
Erasing me.
existence.
Yeah.
No one is erasing you. They just want to talk to you,
Yeah.
and that's different.
Yeah, trans people are human too, as if anyone ever denied that.
No
This is
one
the thing.
denies that.
Yeah,
Exactly.
they like to say things that no one is, argue against things that no one is arguing the opposite side of.
Yeah.
With all that said, I have I'm going to posit a theory that
Hmm.
I don't think anyone has. I've never seen anyone publicly put this forward, but it's something that I've been thinking about for a while. Um, and I cannot help but notice that where a lot of this madness started was following the legalization of same sex marriage. And I have a theory that, look, up until this point, like up until that point, there was always something in the law
Hmm.
that one could argue is discriminatory in the UK, in the USA, etc.,
Yeah.
against a certain group of people, right? And so, if for the decade leading up to that, the gay rights, the gay marriage issue was a
Hmm.
big issue of liberals and the left,
Yeah.
right? And that
Focal
was
point.
something that, because that was something in the legal system that, regardless of someone's views on that, you could argue, okay, that is a discriminatory law.
Yeah.
And once that battle was won, I think that you had millions and millions of activists and people who are on the left and liberals, etc., who actually, for the first time in history, there is no obvious fight, right?
That
So
begs, that begs the question: why can't people admit when they've won?
I
Why,
think,
why do you want to be oppressed?
yeah,
That begs that question.
I think that's what's happened, though. I think like people haven't really looked up and realized maybe we're fighting an invisible enemy here. I know Douglas Murray said something like that, and I think that's the case. I think that for so long, all the time, there was the fight for, the suffragette movement. There was
Yeah.
the waves of feminism. There was the racial justice movement, civil rights, gay rights, etc. And for the first time, and in the first place on the world in history, you could actually look at the British law, and I think you would struggle. Maybe there's something I'm missing, but I think you would struggle to find
Well,
the one thing I can think of is that perhaps men can be topless in public, and I'm not sure if women can be. I think that's like the only law, as far as I'm aware, that you could see on the books and perhaps say, okay, this is not totally applied equally. But
yeah.
apart from that, maybe I'm missing something, but I'm not aware of anything else. And I think that there are so many people now who are activist minded and who are social justice minded who want to fight for they want to fight for something, and they're not sure what that is. So I think that's why you've seen Extinction Rebellion creeping up. I think that's why you've seen BLM. I think that's why you've seen the whole trans thing. Like people weren't talking about trans stuff even just 8 years ago. It wasn't on the
Right.
radar.
It would make sense in terms of why the focus now is on these nebulous things like systemic oppression or institutional oppression, things that you don't need to pin down, you don't need to give data for. It's because obviously the systems are not, like you say, the systems are equitable now. The systems are not against anyone, you know? And so you could say, so yes, yeah, I suppose it's that thing about finding a new enemy.
Yeah, I
It's
think it is because the timing coincides. The timing
yeah,
really coincides because prior to that, it was always if people were pushing for something on that side, it was always like certainly in the I think the whole LGBT acronym is
yeah,
a
yeah,
bit is a bit of a problem in itself. But in that world, it was always okay. We want equal marriage laws. We want equal marriage.
yeah.
That was always that was the thing. For a large
Oh
part of my
yeah,
lifetime,
absolutely.
that was the thing. And then it was like, okay, that barrier fell down. Okay, you got that.
I think
And
it really
now it's
upset
just
people as
like,
well that it came from a conservative government. I think that's what really, really bothered people. That's we've gone so far that the right are pushing through this stuff. So what have you got to complain about now?
yeah,
And then what will happen, particularly with the with gay rights activists is they'll point to instances of homophobia and attacks and that kind of thing. But everyone agrees they're wrong.
Exactly.
Like everyone agrees they're wrong, and they are, by the way, illegal.
Yes.
When that happens, we do something about it. We find the culprits, and they are charged. They're far less frequent when I was a teenager. Those sort of things were happening a lot more. It wasn't. We weren't openly gay as young people. We were, most gay people I knew as a youngster were in the closet by necessity.
Sure.
But even small things like walking through town with your holding another guy's hand would have got you in trouble, right? And that won't be the case anymore. It isn't the case anymore. So this thing about, and this is why I mentioned earlier about, Jim Crow, for instance, and obviously that is systemic racism, where you have a system built to enact racism, right? Yes. But that's not what we have now. And what makes me very nervous is the denial of the truth. So last October, The Guardian had a front cover headline talking about how racism in UK universities is endemic. That's the word it used. And then the data that they themselves cited proved that it was basically non-existent. This was so bizarre to me. They'd surveyed all these universities, and they'd calculated the number of complaints of racism per year. It came out something like 0.5. It was honestly infinitesimal. The headline should have been, "Isn't it wonderful that racism basically doesn't exist in universities anymore?" But they spun it exactly the other way. And what they were saying was, this is evidence that the lived experience of people isn't being recognised through the data, or isn't being this. So like the lack of evidence is evidence for you. Yeah. This backward thinking. So if you make a charge of systemic racism, I like to think that's the start of a discussion, not the end of a discussion. That's a serious accusation. It needs some evidence-based thinking. It needs some interrogation. But at the moment, as you'll notice, it's simply asserted as a truth. Yes. And that, like Sadiq Khan says, London is a systemically racist city. What are you talking about?
That's obviously how he became mayor.
Clearly. What are you talking? And the evidence is always the same. But look, there's this racist attack here. This person shouted this racial slur on the tube. Racism still exists, and there will always be idiots who will behave badly and should be prosecuted if they break the law, right? So we know that. No one's trying to minimize that, as they say. But taking that as evidence as something that is built in and systemic, and applying it to all white people, and saying there's a thing called whiteness in society which needs to be overturned. I mean, these incredible leaps of the imagination, which are so unhelpful and divisive.
Yeah, absolutely. And last point on that, I think a big problem with it as well is that it creates an invisible enemy, whereas you actually have an ally in reality. So again, not trying to rail on the left too much, but a lot of people on the left, a lot of liberals still have this idea that in general, people on the right, or conservatives in general, they have this idea that they're exact same as people who would have been conservatives in the 1940s, right?
Yeah.
And they have this idea that there are two sides, and one side is against racism and the other one is for it. And it's like, no, that's not. Everyone is against it, apart from like some fringe weirdos on both sides. Everybody is opposed to racism. Everybody, like, no one. I'm not seeing people on the right suggesting that black people or gay people or women should be beaten up or being abused, or like, no, absolutely not. But when
amnesia again.
Yeah, but when people come up with these ideas, and you're now sort of, it's like a weapon that you're using. Because if you say institutional racism or sexism or structural or systemic or whatever, and you make an assertion about that and someone challenges it, you can now frame them as if, oh, this person is totally denying that racism exists, or that they somehow support it, or that they support sexism or whatever, right? The LGBT groups do this as well, where they'll say, anyone who has any question or any concern regarding anything to do with, I don't know, transgender people in sport, or changing room things, or stuff involving transitioning children or whatever, that they are, I've been called homophobic for saying that I don't think 4-year-olds should be picking their gender, or that you should be putting them on hormone blockers, etc. Right?
I'm like, such a leak, isn't it? To say you hate
where did you get that
gay
one?
people.
Like, where did you get that one from? You know what I mean? It's just
well, that's the white fragility argument. That all white people are fragile, and if they deny that they're racist, that just proves that they're racist. It's this circular. Yeah, I mean, we've got to get over that. I saw that activist. I can't remember her name. She was on Philip Schofield in the whatever that show is in the morning, and he's saying to her, what is the evidence that the media has a racist problem with Meghan Markle? What's the evidence for that? And her response was, even the fact that you're asking that question is evidence of the institutional racism against Meghan Markle. So this inability to have the discussion and to have the debate is absolutely infuriating, isn't it?
Yes.
It's nuts.
Educate yourself, but it's not my job to educate you. Yeah.
Oh, that one as well, exactly.
That one as
In other
well.
words, I love it when they say read a book. Read what you mean is read the 2 books that you've read in your life. You know, the last thing these people do is read. They certainly don't read widely, and they certainly don't read to challenge themselves. Unfortunately, I do have to read all this stuff. So I read the Renier Lodges of this world, you know, and I do this because I want to know what it is I'm satirizing. So I'm steeped in this stuff. I've recently got a new book. I'm ready. It's come through called "Is Free Speech Racist?" That's the title of that book.
Wow.
I mean, I'm going to go in with an open mind, but I'm guessing the answer is no.
I could write that book. I could write that book in a page.
Yeah. No, it's not.
One word book. One word book.
But obviously this book is making the counter argument. Free speech. Imagine writing a book making the argument that free speech is a racist thing. I mean, and that getting published. So people sitting around the publishing room saying, "Yeah, this looks like a good thing to publish." That's where we're at.
Yep. It's that amnesia again, because how did civil rights even come about?
Right. Exactly. And if you want evidence of exactly what you're saying, I mean, you know, recently when the incoming Director General of the BBC, Tim Davies, said this point about how he wanted more parity, political parity. He wanted a more left and right. You know, he wanted more diversity of opinion. And all of the right as left-wing commentariat, people like Owen Jones, people on Twitter, everyone going, well, they were saying, "Oh, you want to go back to Bernard Manning in the 1970s telling racist jokes?" It's like that's their frame of reference for a conservative comic. Yeah. I would challenge anyone: find me one conservative stand-up comic who is a racist who's on the circuit today. On the circuit today, you won't find one, not one. So this is this figment of their imagination that there's all these, you know, rabid, foaming at the mouth, right-wing racist comics who just want to get on TV to have a go at black people. It's like your mind is like 50 years out of date. Just, you know, it's so weird to me.
Seriously, man. Andrew, It's been we could talk about this for a long time, but I'm conscious of your time, and I want to be respectful of it. But where can people find you online?
Well, I'm on Twitter, of course, unfortunately, AndrewDoyle_com. Or there's Titania McGrath, at Titania McGrath. And you can find, I've got a website, andrewdoyle.co.uk. And, you know, Titania's books they're all on Amazon, you know, because she wants to fight capitalism. So you can get her book there. That's awesome. Where you'll find me.
Where do the profits go?
Where do the profit? Yeah, unfortunately, they go to her. You know, you'd like to think that she had the sort of credibility to give it all away to charity, but she's not really principled.
Andrew, thanks so much for coming on the show, man. Been really good to talk to you, bro.
Thanks a lot.
I do not scam. Put some respect on my name. Sick like